Hello, this is James Rees for another edition of Razorwire. Today we're going to have a spotlight on technology with a good friend of ours at Razorthorn from HighSide, Andy Johnson. Andy, do you want to kind of introduce yourself a little bit? You're the co-founder and chief product officer at HighSide, I believe.
I am, yeah. So exactly as you just put it, I sort of manage our engineering team here, manage our product. So I liaise with the business side as to what we're going to build, and then work out with sort of our CTO and various other heads how we're going to build it and how we're going to architect it. And then it goes on our roadmap, and essentially we bring the feature to life. So it's always fun building what we do. So HighSide, we are the market leader in controlled file sharing and collaboration. So we build software that looks, feels, and functions like modern day collaboration tools and data repository and sharing tools, but it inherently behind the hood of Paint is a cybersecurity application. So we're able to sort of sell this into very regulated, heavily regulated industries, or industries that care about security because they have to.
Absolutely fantastic. And we use it ourselves, actually, for a lot of our customers. It's very highly regarded here, but we'll get into that a bit later on. So, first things first, one of the things we like to do is we like to talk about the history of this type of technology. And when it comes to secure communications, I think we're all pretty aware it's been around for more years than we care to count, be it used quite extensively in warfare, where communications would be encrypted or changed in some way to prevent the enemy from getting hold of information. Be it some kind of cipher set for a message that's being sent, be it coded communications over radio channels. One of my favorite historical pieces of sort of encrypted communication is the Navajo code talkers during World War II, who they had a language that was completely independent of any other language. There was no connotations between any other language, and the Americans in World War II used the Navajo in their encrypted communications, and it's a fantastic story. And I suggest if you don't know about the Navajo code talkers, please go and have a good read. There's some good documentaries on it. But Andy, secure communications has been around for years, isn't it? One form or another.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't matter, obviously it doesn't matter before pre-internet. This was always a problem, right? It's been going on for a long period of time. How do you get one piece of data from one party to another party without it being intercepted? I think we can take that all the way back to ancient Egypt.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, it's been extensively used in a number of different areas, be it warfare, be it to star-crossed lovers who don't want their husbands and wives to know that they've got a bit on the side. It's also been used in quite extensively for people who, especially in the UK, we're very good at that kind of thing. We've got different words for different things in certain parts of London that, some favourite films sort of like Snatch and all the rest of it kind of go over some of the stuff that used to go around in East London in a completely different language that nobody seems to understand, even a lot of us Brits.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's been interesting how it's changed over time. It was back in year dot with the Egyptians. It was communication via kind of messaging, via some kind of written message or spoken message. And over time, that's not really changed for many, many, many years. Then obviously radio came around and we were able to communicate over very long distances, much longer distances than we were previously. And we had to do similar kind of things. We had to transpose words meaning other things. We had to have usually some kind of code book. You've got that one of my favorite kind of, is it conspiracy theory? I don't know if it is, but the stories of like the number towers, on the radio channels, where all of a sudden you'd have a voice speaking a load of numbers, which didn't seem to mean anything. But turns out that it was coded transmissions for governments to communicate with agents. They'd have a book. The numbers would refer to a particular word within a particular book, and you had to know the book in order for this to actually work. And that has been the kind of default for many, many years. Then we fast forward to the internet age, where all of a sudden we have not just the ability to communicate over long distances, but we can communicate almost instantly pretty much with anybody anywhere in the world who has some kind of connectivity to our geosynchronous satellite infrastructure and any corresponding infrastructure that does, point to point on the Earth, which was a big game changer for a lot of organizations and governments as well, because all of a sudden, if you sent, back in the day, if you sent a letter, it would take 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks to get to, say, Australia or New Zealand, or God forbid, if you tried to send anything to the Cook Islands, it'd probably never get there.
Probably never get there, yeah.
Exactly. But nowadays, you can literally communicate with anybody, no matter pretty much where they are, which brings some interesting challenges, doesn't it? Because when it was a messenger holding a note, you just had to worry about getting a couple of thugs or a couple of people who are paid to go and get the message off you, come up to you and beat the crap out of you and run off with the message. Nowadays, you don't even know if you're being listened to. Edward Snowden, good example, kind of love him or hate him, he did show that there are government and elements of various different governments who are spending a lot of time using things like keyword systems, like the echelon system, that kind of thing. I know a lot of that was for also emails as well, but to try and utilize that to find out information on what is going on within that communication stream. Is that sort of your view, Andy?
Yeah, so I think that part of the challenge is obviously we're becoming more and more reliant on the internet for absolutely everything in everyday life, to the point now where we have these new sort of 5G networks going in, and you can have a surgeon in the United States and a surgeon in Japan working or controlling robotic arms on a table in Europe. And, that's all data flowing through our big sort of internet pipes. And that's got to be protected. It's not essentially messaging data, but it's messaging data, I guess, to the machine to do the right thing on the table in Europe. So if we've got to protect this, all this data flowing through the pipes, whether it's that or whether it's flying a drone over the Pacific Ocean that's worth $500 million, or all these new electric cars that are self-driving and how those cars are communicating with each other. All that bits of data just constantly flowing, and whenever that data is flowing between all of these machines or people, it's ripe for attack. Who can intercept it? Who can manipulate it? Who can cause damage in that sort of movement of information? And that's kind of the terrifying thing. We obviously only solve one part of that at HighSide, but that's why I think we have such an amazing cybersecurity industry in the West now, because it's like a big sort of jigsaw puzzle, right? And there's many multi-billion-dollar companies solving different pieces of the pie, all unique and all relevant. But yeah, we're only just scratching the surface, I think, as to what we're going to be able to, what we're going to be using the internet for over the next 10, 20, 30 years, and how that information is going to be protected.
I totally agree. I mean, in 25 years, the internet, when I first got involved with it, was basically for, a few kind of like places where you could go and get information. We didn't even have bloody Google. Google is relatively new comparison. I mean, I'm older than Google, for Christ's sake. There are people I know that aren't older than Google. But Ask Jeeves was one of them. Remember that? Jeez. But when the internet first came out, everything did start changing. And we weren't very good at security back then, not digital security. People were more concentrating on the application and the use of this wonderful new communication medium to be able to talk and, share ideas and certain types of content, which was popular and still continues to be popular today. But security wasn't really built into it. None of the websites back then were really secure. The most you'd get maybe is some kind of secure login, that kind of thing. And that was the medium you used to be able to have comms with. And you're absolutely right. That's now migrated and changed over time. I think I saw a video clip of somebody shaving a guy on the mountainside, a celebrity on the mountainside, from his barber's shop somewhere in New York or something like that. One slip and bang, one malicious actor getting in and introducing some kind of randomness or screwing around with that communication could have had quite a serious effect. And our reliance on communication as a species has also dramatically changed, because back again before the internet, you'd pick up the phone, you call your friend. It was a well-known thing in television back in the sort of 80s of the daughter that never gets off the phone, and you have to shout up to get her off the phone, or your teenager who's ends up with their own phone. This was before mobile phones. God, I'm really showing my age now.
The home phone.
Yeah, but now it's become commonplace and a main part of society. And here we are. We're now sort of considering security at quite a late stage in the evolution of where we are. And you're absolutely right. We're pushing even further now into things like meta and collaboration on a scale that we've never done before. And the pandemic, especially, we've mentioned that a few times. That really expedited communication, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that people don't. There's definitely an education piece. People don't really understand how it all works. When you put your credit card in to pay for your Starbucks or something, you either just tap it now, don't you? But before you used to put in the 4-digit PIN. It just works. No one knows how that works unless you're in payment processing, but it works. The reality is credit cards are insecure, right? They were invented in the 50s, long before the internet, but we use them as the main sort of means of paying over the internet today. That is being disrupted by DeFi and Web3 and crypto, right? But they were never designed to be secure. Just very similar to email, right? Everyone on planet Earth uses email. Outlook has 3 billion users alone on their platform. An email was sort of invented before security was an afterthought, right? And you've had upgrades to the email protocol, and it's almost like putting plasters on an open band-aid, on an open wound. You're just sort of plugging the gaps and not actually fundamentally going back to the drawing board and rewriting the system to be fit for what it's used for today. But yeah, as we move into sort of the metaverse and the next 10 or 20 years in tech, it's definitely going to be extremely interesting. We're talking about, holding digital assets, moving large sums of money or physical things over, blockchains and things like that. How do you protect that? And how do you protect that? Obviously, there's huge decentralized networks out there and things like that, but there's nation states that could or have the computing power to attack those. How do you prevent that? There's so many problems to solve as we sort of invent new technologies. So it's exciting but kind of terrifying at the same time. When you sort of see how the internet and all the infrastructure's held together, it's almost kind of with masking tape. And we're kind of just navigating sort of uncharted waters.
Absolutely. I mean, security has always been a difficult thing when it comes to the internet, because on one hand, you've got security advocates like ourselves who are saying, no, guys, you need to secure your emails. You need to secure the chatter. If you're using Teams or you're using some kind of application, there's a plenty of them out there to talk to colleagues about IP or about ideas or whatever, then, you need to be able to do it securely. And on the other side of the fence, you have the real problems, I think, that exist with secure comms, because you're almost fighting against governments as well, because they want to put back doors. They want to provide insecure, in many respects, security into a medium which we're trying to desperately secure for the same reason. We don't want to be monitored, and we don't want people from other states, from other parts of the world, necessarily listening in on communications. And one of the big arguments is, well, how do we deal with people using secure communication for illicit purposes? We need to have some kind of backdoor into it. And it's like, yeah, but you've got to understand, guys, and this is normally the legislators we have to explain this to, if you put a weakness in something or you put a backdoor in something, it's not just you guys that can use that. Eventually, somebody else will find it. They'll figure out the algorithm. You'll have somebody who'll leak it. One way or another, you can either have secure comms or you can have insecure comms. What would you prefer? And they say, well, we want it secure.
There's no middle. There's no middle. If you have a backdoor, you can't choose who the good actors are and bad actors are. It's a backdoor. It's a backdoor. It could be exploited by absolutely anyone.
Absolutely. So it's a tricky situation, and it's being in that space. It must be quite tough, because I'm don't feel the need to say yes or no or other. But I'm sure there's a lot of, and I've spoken with other security professionals, like, who are working in the Linux space, that kind of thing. There was that famous thing where, was it Linus who was asked, did anybody from a certain government ever ask you to put backdoors into Linux? And he went, no, nobody ever in the government that I'm currently stood in has ever asked me to put security backdoors in to be able to manipulate things or see things on what's going on, And it's rife in this, and it's tough. It's tough to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely.
So here we go. We move into HighSide. It's like, let's be honest, Teams and Zoom seems to have been hammered in when the pandemic kicked off. All of a sudden we went from working in an office with a bit of remote working and home working, but nowhere near as much as it was when the lockdowns kicked in and boom, we're all stuck at home, communicating via Zoom and Teams, which, let's face it, I don't really think Zoom and Teams at the time could really cope with it, especially not the level of traffic that was going on. There was a lot of cut outs.
I think you have to hold your hands off to hold your hat off to, like, Zoom. They were a fairly not new company, but I'm surprised how their infrastructure suddenly coped with that. Midway through March 2020, it's actually quite unbelievable.
The problem is none of it was secured. We had famously had people diving into UK government conversations and displaying parts of their bodies that probably shouldn't have been displayed in a in a parliament meeting. And Teams as well, a lot of Teams communication isn't actually encrypted. It's not, unless you're encrypting an actual file you're sending across independently. The discussions you have, the chats that you send over, none of that is secure. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, I mean, well, part of the problem is, as I mentioned earlier, people just inherently trust these technologies, and it's not, we have a sort of usability problem where, have you sort of, you mentioned you've been in the crypto space for a while. Have you tried to use some of these Bitcoin wallets? It's quite difficult. And they're essentially the right way to do it. But most people in crypto just end up leaving their crypto assets with centralized custodians such as Coinbase, because it's easy. You log in, there's 2FA, great, I have my stuff. It's that same sort of challenge is what we have with communications and file sharing software, where there's a usability versus security sort of line, and sometimes you can't have both, and you need to sort of have trade-offs. We could build the most amazingly secure system where everyone trades encryption keys, very similar to like PGP. Funny story, actually. The early days when we were building HighSide, we all traded. There was 5 of us in the office, and we all traded PGP keys to use over sort of email. And it took sort of four engineers the sort of best part of like 3 hours how to like figure this out. And now you multiply that at a company like JP Morgan, right, where you have over 100,000 people. Everyone's meant to trade keys. Everyone's meant to know what a key is. No one knows what a key is. Just like the internet in the early days, what is a web URL, a URL? What is a browser? Like these sort of same words are around to, in the industry that we work in. So we've got to build sort of software that people know how to use. So there's no sort of learning curve as to sort of how you use it. And there's no sort of settings that they need to go and configure to essentially sort of make it secure and keep it secure. It needs to be secure by default. It needs to be, understandable and usable from the get-go with no learning curve. But it needs to be secure. So I figured, this was a very hard challenge, especially with scalability. But I figured we've come to a very nice balance at HighSide, where not every user has to control keys, but it's usable, by sort of your least technical team member, but also, it can scale to organizations from, a 50-person startup all the way through to large government agencies. And that has been a challenge. And, as I stand here, not at the top of the mountain, obviously, but at the side of the mountain, because we've got so much more we need to build. And we look down and we see these cliffs, and we see these things, these big problems that we've come across. So we said, okay, how do we make that work, and how do we keep it secure? But going back to your original question about sort of the tools like Microsoft Teams, Zoom and things like that, it's very difficult to do full end-to-end encryption at scale. So a lot of what these sort of big centralized software products do is they sort of encrypt, but they themselves hold the encryption keys. So for example, with Microsoft Teams, you have 2 users that are part of a conversation, and they're sending messages, files, data, whatever. Microsoft are providing the encryption keys, and then it essentially is going over SSL to them, to their central servers, and then Microsoft are decrypting that and just sort of storing it there in the server, but the encryption key is right there. So it allows them to check a box, but if you really look into it, it's just like locking your house and leaving the key right there on your doorstep. It's going to be a little more, frustrating for someone that wants to burgle your house to just, rather than just them opening the door, they have to pick up a key or find it in the flower pot, but it's there and they know it's there. That is exactly the same thing that's happening with these big collaboration softwares that everyone trusts and knows and trusts.
You've just described most of my life in security. How do you make it usable without making it so difficult for the user? And you're absolutely right. The comms is, for things like Teams and various other products, it is all encrypted. But when you're holding the keys, as you say, in the same places where you're encrypting it, there's no real encryption. All you need to do is get in, grab the keys, and that's it. You're done. You've got everything. You can get everything. This is why, I'm I could see a significant movement. We were talking about this, just before, a significant movement from the old key management solutions that you would have for any type of encryption within an organization. It used to be sat there on its own VLAN or its own network, piece of the network with programmatic access and all the rest of it. But if you managed to get in there, that was it. Boom, you are screwed. Your keys are gone. And so's your ability to encrypt anything without somebody who already stolen the key, gaining access to it. And it would take you a feasibly long time to figure out somebody had done that as well. And that's the tough thing when it comes to key management, when it comes to encryption, when it comes to protecting communications, be it files, be it chatter like we're doing, over long distance. How do you secure it in a way, as you say, where a user can just pick it up and run with it with minimal levels of knowledge, but also be accepting in the fact that it's as secure as it feasibly needs to be? And I think that's the key thing there, because as you say, you could make it horribly secure. You could make HighSide as the most secure, solution on the planet, but it would be so unusable with the various different layers that you'd have to peel through to just to be able to install it and have that chat. And I think you guys have done a fantastic job, as I said at the beginning, and I'll freely say this to anyone, including on a video like this. We use HighSide ourselves for communication with our customers, with our key customers who use us for CISO as a service. We also use it to for them to send us files and us to send them files. Obviously we've got independent storage and what have you as well. We don't keep it all there, but it's a key significant piece. It's not to say we don't use things like Teams for just general chit chat, but at the end of the day, if it comes down to anything related to clients that we need to keep, secure, we do use your product, and it is very usable as well. There's hook-ins to Teams anyway, isn't there?
Yeah, so we maintain we have really two products. We have something called our HighSide One suite, which is what you guys use, and that's our sort of standalone version of something like Microsoft Teams. It's entirely custom built by ourselves. We invented our own protocol. There's a lot of people that work at HighSide from the crypto space, so we borrow some fundamental principles from sort of Bitcoin and crypto as a whole. But we also have another product which we call Secure Teams, which is sort of a Microsoft Teams application where you can communicate end-to-end encrypted and send data end-to-end encrypted within Microsoft Teams without ever sort of leaving Microsoft Teams. And again, it's as easy as a tenant administrator sort of deploying or installing our application with 2 clicks to their entire tenant and accepting permissions. And then from that point forward, any user in your tenant simply clicks the plus icon on any Microsoft Teams conversation, select Secure Teams, and they can start running with it. It enables sort of movement of data through whilst using Microsoft Teams on any device, browser, desktop, mobile, but keeps the data sort of end-to-end encrypted. We can't see it. Whoever's man in the middle in your network can't see it. Nation states that are sort of taking the encrypted information and trying to decipher it can't see it, and Microsoft can't see it. So that is our Secure Teams application.
No, it's fantastic. And you're absolutely right. This is really what we need, in a day and age where, let's face it, very few of us are going to be going back to the office full time. Not in the way that we used to, 2.5 years ago, two and a bit years ago. It's that's it now. That horse has bolted. And I think a lot of companies have realised they can make a big saving on their corporate offices as well. Rather than having the big plush office in the middle of New York or whatever that would cost them millions upon millions on a yearly basis to maintain, their workforce are happier at home because they don't have to do the commute. They don't have to go through the cost of the commute. It's great for consultants like us as well because, my consultants are rarely in the office all at the same time. We're off seeing customers. Okay, yeah, there was a little bit more working from the office recently because we still have certain restrictions that have only just stopped. But secure comms is going to be a real cornerstone of things going forward, and making sure that organizations that have presences, say, in the US and in, I don't know, pick somewhere, China, they can communicate knowing that, short of the endpoint being monitored itself, and recorded at the endpoint, that comms string, that comms channel is from point to point. Yeah, you're not getting into it, and yeah, at that point, all you've got to do is worry about your endpoints,
Exactly. So we do a few things on that, but it's going back to that cybersecurity puzzle. HighSide's threat model allows for disruption of service, but not decryption of data. So from the moment data sort of leaves your endpoint, your device, to the moment it gets stored on the server or received at any other participants that need to receive that information. We're validating that cannot be broken. We do these sort of exercises all the time where, if we have a foreign adversary working in HighSide that is somehow, sort of tricked their way through the job interview process and is, inside our organization, like what disruption can they cause to customers? What can they do essentially? And the answer, always goes down to our threat model, which is disruption of service, but not decryption of data. We do strict cryptographic checks. The HighSide application does strict cryptographic checks where every bit of data it receives, it has to pass sort of stringent cryptographic checks to make sure that data has originated where it is meant to originate from, and B, hasn't been tampered with. And we can tell if both of those, are true or false. And, if we know that data has been tampered with, the party that's tampered with the data, it's just going to see ciphertext, but the applications just discard it and alert the user that something fishy is going on. So there's lots of checks like that. There's sort of lots of things that we have in place where if a foreign adversary were to get into our central SaaS servers, and sort of manipulate data in the database, things like that, contact records. They can't inject contact records into your organization. They can't change data retention policies and things like that. All of those records have to be signed by, a tenant administrator key and things like that. So we have some I could talk for this all afternoon, but we have some very interesting technology and features under the hood which prevent all of this stuff whilst making the system usable all the time for any organization of any size.
Yeah, you touch on a very interesting point, actually. The whole kind of, what if somebody gets into your organization to try to manipulate the code as it's being generated, that kind of thing, to compromise,
Yeah, we've definitely, there's two things here. The first point is generally a lot of these sort of attacks that we see is starts with phishing and spoofing. Whether it's a hacker or a nation state group, they phish or spoof their way into an organization, so they're inside the network. Then once they're inside the network, they figure out how and where they need to go to sort of get the central sort of treasure trove as such. And the way that these tools are built and information's being stored is there really is sort of this central treasure trove where you can sort of phish or spoof one person on, in a company of say 3,000 employees, and then be able to get into a central server and scrape absolutely every bit of data possible and have all that data be usable and readable to you. With HighSide, every user on the platform has their own encryption keys. So because of the way that we're doing all the encryption, there's no sort of central point of failure. There's no one person that you can phish or spoof to sort of get in and scrape every bit of data that is in your HighSide tenant. It's just not possible by design. The second point is with our software sort of development lifecycle and sort of pipeline, we internally have to follow very stringent rules to make sure that no malicious code is being built into our application. And then once we're confident of that with our software delivery and QA process, the way we deliver updates of our software to our users follows a very, very, very special process as such, where you're using HighSide today at Razorthorn. We basically have designed it so that if sort of our cloud system, our cloud infrastructure is hacked, that sort of a foreign adversary cannot just put a new version of HighSide that they've tampered with on our cloud and have it be pushed down to all of our users. Essentially, again, that even software updates have to have strict cryptographic checks with keys that we have, in various places all around the world. It's a process that I can briefly touch on, but it's a very, very secure software delivery process, essentially, to make sure that to sort of stop, a sort of a tainted version of HighSide essentially be injected into our cloud and pushed down to all of our users. That can't happen.
I think some much larger companies need to take a leaf out of that particular book. And I think everybody knows who we're talking about. But no, it's an interesting subject, and I think there's still a long way to go as well, isn't there? I mean, we touched upon the whole meta thing, and the way we communicate is rapidly changing, and this technology is having to change ever so quickly to accommodate that change. At the moment, we're talking via video feed, we're talking via the kind of like chat abilities with all of this stuff. But when we go to meta, it's going to be different. It's going to be avatars discussing things on platforms that are going to be comparatively quite open. How are you going to communicate with somebody else when we go into the metaverse in a way that is going to be secure? So I can say talk to you, but if I'm sat in the same room as somebody else, in the metaverse, they can't see what we're talking about or even listen in on us. It's the same principle, and it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out over time. And I think you guys are going to be right at the forefront of it. I think I don't normally advocate products on this kind of thing, but we really enjoy working with you guys, and a lot of our customers are pretty happy with it as well, because up until now, just simple getting files to somebody, some kind of secure file transfer, has been, I've got to upload it somewhere, it then sends a link over, then that link has to get opened and they have to download it, and then everybody sort of wonders whether or not there's been a problem if it hasn't downloaded properly, because all of a sudden nobody can open it and it's corrupted, and you have to go back and do the whole process again, and it is cumbersome. And again, going back to something you said before, security has to be effective, but it also has to be usable. Hello, sorry for that last rough cut at the end of the HighSide Spotlight on Technology video. Unfortunately, we had a slight failure with the camera at the time at my end, so we kind of lost that last end point. So redoing this lead out, I'd like to thank Andy Johnson for attending that. It's been a fantastic discussion with them about the subject matter of secure communication and what HighSide can offer. So just wanted to thank you all for watching. Please feel free to like, subscribe, press the little bell notification, and you'll be notified of new videos as they become available. We have a whole host of new content that's coming out, including a very new podcast, which we're currently recording and pulling together. So thank you ever so much for watching, and you'll see us again soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye.